So yeah, the solution that we propose there is small database on your phone of hashes of images, videos, and text that was already fact checked. Could be 1 megabyte for like hundreds of thousands of images and videos, and you can do very efficiently check like, okay, is this if I get an image, like is this image in this database or not, and you can detect a lot of misinformation. That's where the 82% number comes from. But this is practically a very like there's a lot of debate and contention, especially from the privacy advocates on this. Apple introduced or was trying to introduce some of these same kinds of tools, which like they work on device, but they scan your gallery for child sex abuse material. And then if there's some match, then they report it to the authorities kind of thing. So it's technically feasible to do this, but it's not practical. AI as a solution is definitely that's something that we are exploring. One is it's a conversation, right? Like, so it's you need to understand the context, and the context is very, very dependent on like the context of the group. Like, so if you and your friends are in a group, you could call someone something insulting, but if it's the culture of the group and it's an internal joke, then it's not hate speech.
If you don't mind, can I get right into it?
Sure.
Okay. First of all, how did you get into this field of research, Kiran? Like, so, WhatsApp University, if you don't mind me using that word. Yeah. I guess I'll stick to WhatsApp University today, or WhatsApp today, not Twitter so much. Maybe we can talk about Twitter too. What motivated you to get into this research? What brought you to this space?
Yeah. So I have a background in computer science. I have a PhD in computer science, and I was doing a lot of work on studying things like political polarization in the US, the usual stuff like with Twitter data that everyone was doing. And this was back in 2017, 2018, when these like ideas of like misinformation here in the US especially were just picking up. Like, okay, misinformation research has been done for a long while, but especially after Trump and Brexit and all of these, like in the US, like academic interest in misinformation as a topic like really skyrocketed. There's been a lot of interest in this space. And that was when like one of the summers I was in India, and I think it was the summer of 2017, when there was suddenly a spate of incidents of like offline violence, like rumors about child kidnapping, killing people, like real violence and lynchings, things like that. Like, and this was just in a very short duration. Around like 30 to 40 people got killed, and many people were injured. Like, this is in various parts of India, all across India. And the root cause of this was just one rumor about one video about your children are being kidnapped by strangers coming to your village. Be careful, right? Like, so that was the rumor that was spreading, and anyone who entered a village just was attacked, and this really spread like wildfire. And that really got me thinking about like looking at WhatsApp. Okay, obviously there's very little work on WhatsApp. Primarily there's that bias because it's not really that widely used here in the US. And like most academia like really just looks at Twitter, which is much more easier to get data from and things like that. And so there were two like real reasons. So one is just a selfish reason that this is a new platform, like new data, new interesting insights. So that was one. The other is just this sort of like online information leading to offline consequences. That's a really new idea, right? And back then, like I'm talking about 7 years ago. Even like just to give you some context, like even until recently, like until the Jan 6 thing happened, like people would not really care about misinformation as an offline consequence, right? Like, so people would say, yeah, okay, what if like people, small amount of people consume misinformation, like it's just an online phenomena. But online consumption leading to offline activity, I mean, this has happened in India and in many places in the global south quite a bit. But in the US, like many big academics like really did not consider this as a big threat until this Jan 6 2021 happened. So yeah, but these were the two of the reasons why I got into this around 2018 or so.
Yeah, I mean, I also want to add to that conversation. I've seen very personal effect of this, Kiran, is that, I've seen my parents' relationship between themselves. For example, my parents' relationship with their friend circle, my very close friends, and if they're ever going to watch this, I might get some hate, but uh, but it's a real thing, right? Like where religious polarization, religious messaging. Uh, like one of the things you said, 82%. One of the research, I went through all of your papers, and some of the statistics were like mind blowing. Where even after being debunked, they get reshared and things like that. And even my relative circle, my cousins and my uncles and so forth, and it goes on to this very day, right?
Yeah.
Like it's happening today. Information that's just manufactured to rouse your emotions, manufactured to get you to vote one versus the other way, and so on. So this is very personal to me, is I guess my point. And I guess I want to dive right into it. Like, what can be done about this, Kiran? Like, so you've laid out a bunch of research stuff. Practically speaking, can you kind of walk through, let's say, from a technical perspective, let's start with that. Let's say some entrepreneurs want to do a startup or a technology or a plugin or some kind of software. What can, I mean, of course, I'll put links to the papers and stuff. Like, what can be done from a 30,000-foot view?
Yeah, okay. So maybe I'll just give you some context of like why this is a very difficult problem, particularly for WhatsApp, right? Like our platform like WhatsApp. And the reason is end-to-end encryption, right? Like, so there's this end-to-end encryption on WhatsApp, because of which, so what that means is, just to simplify, if I send you a message, if I send you a message on Facebook, if I sent you a picture of a cat, Facebook will know, okay, A sent a message to B and it's a picture of a cat, right? But on WhatsApp or other encrypted platforms, end-to-end encrypted platforms, if I send you a picture, Facebook or WhatsApp just knows that I sent you a picture, but they don't know what is in it. Like, so it could just be a cat picture, or it could be a hate video, right? Like, so you don't know what is the content of the information that is spreading on the platform. So that is a huge problem in moderating any sort of content. Like, so on Facebook, for instance, the Facebook platform, you have a lot of moderators who can, content is flagged, and then the moderators look at that and say, okay, this is hate speech, this is misinformation, this is whatever false information, and they can downrank it, take it down, label it. Like, they have a bunch of strategies to work with that. On WhatsApp, there's no such infrastructure. Firstly, okay, there's two sides of it, right? So one is this necessary? Like, yes, right? Like, there's this end-to-end encryption provides privacy where nobody is able to look at any of your personal conversations. So that is, a solid point on WhatsApp's behalf, that, they're saying, okay, we don't want to look at your content. We don't want to do any sort of personal moderation. Okay, so that's one end of the spectrum. The other end of the spectrum is the cases of examples that I told you, right? Like, so we knew that this particular video was causing riots in all these villages across India. Hundreds of people are being injured, but WhatsApp cannot do anything or does not want to do anything about it, right? Like, so there's, these sorts of really opposing ends of the spectrum. Okay, so this is the problem. Now, what can be done about this? So, obviously, we all agree that, encryption and privacy is a good thing. We don't want to break encryption. For instance, certain governments, like the Indian government, the UK government, Australia government, they have cases where they're saying, WhatsApp is being misused for child sexual exploitation, right? Like, so you have to break encryption in these cases, and it's usually, if you break encryption, you're giving like a pass, right? Like, so encryption is a box. If once opened, you can give access to anything. You cannot just say, I'll only give you access to say CSAM content. It's a once you open it, you are breaking encryption forever. So that's the problem. So what can be done? So there are multiple ways. So one is what the platform can do in terms of the levers that the platform has in designing solutions. And WhatsApp has done a decent enough job here. Like, for instance, they've introduced friction in reducing the spread of information, right? Like, so, one thing you can do is, if a piece of content has been forwarded many times, like, forwarded a certain number of times, we'll introduce friction to make sure that this is not, massively forwarded over and over again, right? Again, what they've done is they said, okay, you can only forward to 5 people at a time, And if the content has been forwarded more than 5 hops from the original sender, then you cannot forward it more than one person at a time, right? Like, so that, it does not really fully solve the problem, but it introduces friction. And we have some work that shows that this really slows down the spread of the information, like by an order of magnitude. Like, so, if it would take, 100 hours previously to spread some information, now it take 1,000 hours. So that's a really significant amount of change of time, like how long it takes for information to spread, right? And that's a very good lever. But the problem is, like, especially given how invested actors are, like various actors, like political parties, for instance, are in this game, right? Like, so, especially, there's research on, my research, but also some other work by the Washington Post, for instance, in India, that shows that just one political party in India has like 100,000 people in one state working on social media activity. Most of it is just WhatsApp, right? So if you have 100,000 people just sitting and forwarding content or creating content and forwarding content, they can just keep doing it, right? One at a time. There's nothing stopping it from stopping them from doing this, and they can eventually, spread their information. So it's not a complete solution, but it is one solution. Like, so this sort of forwarding limits are a good solution to a majority of us, right? Like, so, and like 99.999% of WhatsApp is not people from political parties. It's people like you and me who are using it normally. We don't have any, malicious intent to spread this rumor, particularly. Like, a lot of people just spread it out of concern. Like the same with the child kidnapping rumor. Like, people just shared it out of concern that any child must be protected, right? Like, so it does work to a large extent, but it is not a solution for certain types. Like, so if there's propaganda or disinformation or hate speech kind of thing, which a certain political party or an invested actor wants to spread, that is not going to solve this problem. Okay, so that's the top-down solution. There's very limited top-down of what the platform can do. So that's one thing that WhatsApp has done very well. That's good. The other is in terms of more bottom-up solutions, which is what the users can do, right? Like, so what the users can themselves do. And one solution there that, again, WhatsApp has experimented quite a bit and invested and spent a lot of money on is just digital literacy, right? Like, so to help people know, and I think, this podcast, one example of spreading, example like in awareness and digital literacy. WhatsApp has taken like, full page ads in newspapers saying, yeah, follow these rules. Don't, if it arouses your emotions, like, it's most likely to be false. Those are some simple tricks to make sure that people don't forward, misinformation or rumors or hate speech kind of content. But it's not they have advertised it during the elections, and they're done, right? Like, so they don't want to do too much. Like, it's not cheap, but it's also not a long-term solution. The other thing that they're doing is develop these things called tip lines. I don't know if you've heard of these. So these are just hotline numbers. These are like WhatsApp numbers that a lot of fact-checking agencies in India have. And if you get any misinformation, let's say I get it in Telugu, I can forward it to a Telugu tip line that's run by a specific fact-checking organization, right? But one thing that the reality of these, again, there's a lot of money that's being spent on these to maintain these tip lines, to build technology, to make sure that these tip lines work, and to pay for the fact-checking efforts that go into this. But the truth is, just the scale at which these tip lines operate is very, very, very small. Like, so again, for scale, like WhatsApp is so big. So just in India, over 50 billion messages are sent every day, right? Wow. Like, so just that's the scale of WhatsApp. And I was working with some tip line that was run during the last election, like 2019 election, and the scale was like around 100,000 messages that we got to that tip line in 3 months, right? Like, so during the election period, in 3 months, we got 100,000 messages. Just looking at those messages, okay, it might look like a lot, 100,000, but if you look at the overall scale, if people are getting, you're talking about trillions of messages over the 3 months period. And your fact checking, or the amount of messages you got for fact checking, are like 100,000, right? So it just does not scale well. And most likely, the people who consume misinformation, people like my mom or my my family, like they don't know of this, right? Like so they don't know of an
Right.
existence of such a tip line, or they don't even know that, okay, this could be misinformation. Let me ask this fact-checking tip line or whatever, right? Like, so it just does not scale. And so, okay, so I told you like these two examples, like one is a top-down friction, okay, that works to a certain extent. The other is bottom-up, like digital literacy kind of thing that also, works to some extent. It does not work fully. What else are we trying now? Like, we are trying other solutions, like variants of these digital literacy kind of like that help in scaling up these, awareness and understanding of people. Like, so for instance, you can, one thing we realized in our research is a lot of the misinformation, like around 40% of it, can be very easily debunked. Like, so these are just old misinformation that has already been fact-checked, that is just reshared and respreading, right? Like, so this child kidnapping rumor, it started, I don't know, 10 years ago. Even if today, if you open WhatsApp, it will be really spreading virally, right? Like, and
Right.
a lot of people just don't know that this has already been debunked. And so if you can provide tools that enable the connection of, okay, this video or this image has already been fact-checked easily, like, can we make that happen? Like, so whatever tools you can provide to enable users to connect fact-check content to misinformation, like information that people receive, I think that's an easy solution, like that, where you're not giving the burden to the user, but you have some sort of technology that enables this sort of matching between fact-check content and content that people receive. I think that's an easy solution that, okay, users can quickly say, oh yeah, okay, this seems to have been fact-checked here, and this is a fact-check. So, that could be a solution. So we're trying out solutions like that. But yeah, scaling up these is not an easy in practice. Yeah.
Yeah. So, can you speak a little bit about that? Is it on your phone? I know one of the papers you mentioned that in a kind of a localized fact-checking database you have on your phone, and it can sort of, filter out messages or at least flag it for you. Is that what you're referring to?
Yeah. So that's one way of operationalizing it and implementing it. So yeah, the solution that we propose there is, instead of having you can have a small database on your phone of hashes of images, videos, and text that was already fact checked. You don't even have to have all the videos and images. You can just compress them and represent them as hashes. So this is very, very small. It could be 1 megabyte for like hundreds of thousands of images and videos. So very small.
Wow.
That can fit on your phone, and you can do very efficiently check, like, okay, is this, if I get an image, like, is this image in this database or not? This can be done on the device. We've shown, that this works very efficiently, and you can detect a lot of misinformation. That's where the 82% number comes from. So you could prevent a lot of the spread of the information just by making sure that you do this. So one thing we realized after we wrote that paper is, okay, this is technically possible, but this is practically a very contention. Like, there's a lot of debate and contention, especially from the privacy advocates on this. So the issue there, like, so the discussion came out after Apple introduced or was trying to introduce some of these same kinds of tools, which, like, they work on device, but they scan your gallery for child sex abuse material. And then if there's some match, then they report it to the authorities, kind of thing. And there was a lot of discussion, and Apple actually backtracked, like, in not doing it. And the discussion there was, again, this sort of privacy versus criminality, right? Okay, maybe there's 0.0001% of all the population has this sort of content, like child sex abuse content, but now you're scanning everyone's phone and matching it with your database. So how do we guarantee that you don't inject some sort of like content that maybe in India or in some other country that's an authoritarian country, they'll ask you to inject some sort of benign video, like, I don't know, Trump getting shot, or like Biden falling down the stairs or something like that they don't want anyone to see, and they will be able to then track, okay, all these people have this on their phone, right? Like, so how do you make sure that this database that you're creating centrally, that you're then shipping to the phones, is foolproof? Like, so that is very hard problem. Like, and how do you ensure that it will never ever have anything other than these sorts of child sex abuse material or whatever, right? Like, so it could be easily misused. So there's that sort of thing. So it's technically feasible to do this, but it's not practical. And also if, for instance, Windows or Microsoft is scanning your computer all the time for what porn you have or what other stuff you have, that's not a world we want to live in, right? Like, so
Right.
that's the kind of argument that was made by all these privacy advocates, and I really believe that that may not be the best solution for that we should think of as a solution.
Yeah, so I guess what I'm hearing is that this is an ongoing challenge, and we just have to, from a technical perspective, we just have to keep trying our best and designing better algorithms and better ways to educate people, and there's really no airtight solution at the end of the day.
Yeah. I mean, this is an ongoing area of research. Right now, we're working on some other variants of that, like where, if you can, again, like this is very practical, like where, like I said, like a lot of misinformation is very easy to debunk, but many people may not have the tools to do it. But, if you think of, your local network, like, so maybe my mom does not have the capability to debunk all the misinformation that she gets, but, I'm in her network and I have the tools to just reverse image search or Google search a specific set of keywords, right? And she will trust me more than she will trust some random fact checker, right? Similarly, like, take any network, there's very good chance that, someone in the network is capable of doing these some sorts of very local basic tasks that enable like fact checking, right? Like, so we are now trying to deploy some of those in a way, like if you can recruit people in a network and try to get some sort of information on what they're receiving, and can you correct this sort of misinformation locally without having to send it to some sort of central fact checker, overwhelming their resources and all of that kind of thing. But yeah, this is an open problem. There's no clear solution that works and scales right now, but yeah, there's a lot of work going in this space.
Yeah, so I think the follow-up to that is the second part of it. My question was, okay, so on one hand, you've got technical solutions, you've got research, R&D, folks like yourself are working on that. But from a socio-cultural perspective, so, a lot of times I look at the messages being forwarded to me, it's just confirmation bias, right? Like there was already a pre-existing kind of belief or notion about a certain group of people. You received content, it looks legitimate to you, and it's like, see, I told you, this is actually going on. So to me, it's like this also amplifies this, right? Like you can't, that's a harder problem to fix. How do you fix, where people are more diligent about looking at their data, or diligent about their stuff? Because I mean, WhatsApp and digital proliferation is a relatively new thing in India, right? Like, and then we've got a mass illiteracy. There's that problem compounding on all of this. So it's like, have you ever thought about these kind of socio-cultural issues and how we tackle that?
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, all of these things that I mentioned to you are like the solutions are only for people who are willing to listen and
Right.
get corrected, right? Like, and again, like we have data that proves to what extent like these are feasible. And again, like if you talk about misinformation particularly, a lot of it, like let's say 80% of it is benign misinformation. Just okay, drink hot water and you'll cure your throat or whatever, or whatever, this child is being kidnapped.
Are you sure, Kiran? Maybe I'm part of
Again, like
maybe I'm
Yeah.
part of WhatsApp groups where there's just blatant hate stuff, right?
Yeah.
And it's pretty incessant. Like I open up my WhatsApp in the morning when I wake up. That's the first sort of thing I do, catch up with all the stuff that has happened in India. And it's a queue of literally 40, 50 messages of just like 80. I mean, like you said, 80% of it is just, just red meat thrown at you, right? Like, and it's like, these are educated people. These are folks who went to college, got a degree, are in business or whatever, IT and all of these things. It's not, in my opinion, at least in my personal experience, anecdotally speaking, I mean, I've seen this manifesting in awful ways. People breaking off ties, relationships getting frayed, and things like that.
Yeah. I mean, personal experiences might differ. Like my experience is similar. Like most of what misinformation I get is very clean, like politically oriented, politically motivated, and those kinds of behaviors and beliefs are extremely hard to change, right? Like, so if you tell someone who's a X party supporter to say, your party, whatever ideology is wrong, like that is not going to work, right? It's a very, very hard thing to change. And there
Yeah.
are certain techniques that, may change that in long term and things like that. But whatever solutions we are thinking of are only for this sort of more softer kind of misinformation, which is not based on like, where people have pre-made opinions. And again, like, at the scale of WhatsApp, even solving that, like maybe it's not 80%, maybe it's 60%, maybe it's 20%, right? Like, so
Mhm.
it doesn't matter. Like, even if you solve that 20%, like you're really solving at WhatsApp scale a large problem. Like,
Yeah.
that's where how I think about it. Like, definitely, there's this, again, like a significant chunk of it where people have pre-made their opinions. And again, like it's a much more systemic, it's much more societal kind of issue where again, I mean, maybe the solutions do exist, like where, for some of these problems, like the issue is just more of a top-down push. Like, one individual person, like if they can come out and say, this is not what we stand for, or this is not, so you can change mass opinion just based on one leader, one guy, one person, one entity saying something, right? Like, so those kinds of things are.
Or even, sorry to interrupt you, but even like prioritizing critical thinking education in primary school could be a pretty
Yeah,
good solution.
yeah. I mean, definitely, I think that's something that has to be like, yeah, but that just ignores a lot of this sort of lost generation, like, yeah, your friends, my family, your family kind of thing, where there's still like, these beliefs are so rampant, and we see them quite often. Like, those
Mhm.
are, yeah, definitely hard to change.
Yeah. Earlier you mentioned the political parties, having these IT cells and things like that. And I guess, I mean, these parties are very open about it. They're very brazen about it, right? Like they have a IT cell, head honcho who speaks in public and things like that. Various political parties have this stuff. Like, is that? I mean, what is your opinion about that whole thing? Where these IT cells are generating content to throw red meat at you, to rouse up your emotions and so on. Is it can if legally we introduce something like, well, this is illegal, is that too much of an overreach, legal overreach, or what is your opinion on that sort of thing?
Yeah. So, I mean, one thing is there's no clear causal link between, your social media presence and outcomes, right? And
Mm,
a lot of political parties in India know that. There is some non-significant amount of effect for sure. Like, but we saw in the recent election, right? Like, so I mean, we have been doing this very, very large scale WhatsApp data collection. We were monitoring thousands of WhatsApp groups. Most of them are just, pro BJP content,
mm.
but the results don't really reflect that. Like, and similarly, you have had like multiple instances of this, like Karnataka, for instance, where they really went in all in, like with a lot of campaigns and so on. Again, the result did not come to their benefit. Like, so when you're thinking about like banning or any regulation or any of these kind of things, yeah, you don't really like, we don't clearly have evidence that shows that, yeah, having this very popular IT cell that produces all of this content really makes a difference electorally.
Really? Okay.
So
I was thinking there's a fairly easy way to, I mean, earlier you mentioned that example where this one video circulated and there was riots and there was the outcomes were pretty negative. I mean, you could probably draw some kind of conclusions from that, right? Similar
uh,
conclusions.
it's very hard to say like this caused this, like, because
Hmm.
electorally, like, there's all these rallies happening and much. So what people consume is not just social media, especially in a country like India. Social media still, okay, the people are on social media, but not just on social media, right? Like, you still have like TV, you still have
Sure.
offline sources, you have a bunch of other sources. So it's very hard. And again, like, you can see the results, right? Like, so in UP, like where we have data from, like most of the viral information, like most of the content that is forwarded many times on WhatsApp is
Mm,
like, significantly tilted towards pro BJP, but
mhm.
results were like more like 50-50, right? Like, so it doesn't
Okay.
necessarily mean. And I talked to some of these parties, like people
Mhm.
from SP or Congress, and their strategy was that social media is too expensive, it's too hard to maintain, especially at scale. Like, so you can have an IT cell, but if you have to constantly keep creating content and constantly create content that engages people, that's a very big expense. So they would rather spend that on offline campaigning, door to door, reaching out to people, giving money to people, whatever, like other modes that pay more bang for the buck, right? And it's not completely clear that this pays off. Maybe it does in the long term, right? Like, and that's what we were talking about. Maybe over the 15 years since social media has existed, like the strategies and the kinds of content and narratives that this one party has created, they don't, it might have some ups and downs here and there, but that sort of narrative might really, is now a reality in India, and no longer like that. 15 years ago, you could not have said some things, but now you can say those things much more openly because maybe social media conversations have normalized some of these. That it's people feel okay to say some of these, right? Like, so those sorts of long-term trends might exist, but short-term electoral gains are not may not. I don't think it's very clear that it really has an effect.
Yeah, I mean, to that point, like the Overton window could be shifted constantly, right? Like if you're constantly bombarding kind of one kind of information to your constituents, you could clearly shift it. I mean, it's not a direct cause and effect sort of thing, but over a period of time, like you said, and that's what I'm observing anyway, because pre 2015, I think is worth mentioning that most of my friends I would speak to were like kind of a moderate spectrum of beliefs. It's like, okay, Hindus, Muslims, Christians, whatever, all of this stuff was sort of, accepted as part of Indian life. This was just, we're a multicultural society, blah, blah, blah. But then as I've seen in 10 years since 2015, it's pretty clear that the Overton window has shifted. Like it's even though the facts don't, reflect that on the ground, the attitudes have changed. It's like the moment something happens, you just lunge to this one conclusion that this group must have, done this or that. Anyway, I think we agree on that. I guess here's a personal question for you, Kiran. You've studied in India. You did your PhD in Finland, in Europe, and then you did a postdoc in MIT and things like that. So all you've kind of spent a lot of time in all of these three continents. What have you seen from a societal perspective, from a cultural perspective, that makes certain groups of people susceptible to misinformation?
Yeah, that's very, very interesting. Like, so I mean, there is research that talks about like the types of people who are susceptible to misinformation or to conspiracy theories and narratives and things like that. So I mean, it depends on the context and the types of narratives and things like that. Like, but I think overall, like especially there's not really a lot of work in the Indian context, even though it's such a huge and important population. Like it's not much. I think some of my work in this space, some other political scientists are doing some work in this space, but not a lot. In the US, like even recently, there was some very high profile, like large scale studies that show that most misinformation consumers are older people who are on the right and are of a have a certain type of belief system. And
this is in the US or in general?
In the US. This is all in the US.
Okay.
But my assumption is again, that's where I was coming to. Like, so all of these groupings have a certain common phenomena. One is lack of digital literacy, right? Like, so the older generations may not have had as much exposure. Like, it's a new shock to them coming onto this medium as someone who's a bit more younger, who's a much more digital native, who's seen some of these. Like, you've suddenly, again, this is one of the reasons why it's a big problem in India, is because of that sudden introduction of social media. A lot of that digital literacy narratives that you and me have come through 15 years ago with the email scams, and now a lot of people are going through that phase. Again, it might settle down the line, maybe 5-10 years down the line, that people are inoculated to some of these very obvious types of misinformation. But again, new types of threat might emerge. So that's one, the older folks. The other was more Republican, and this is where like most of the impact for misinformation is, or beliefs in misinformation are formed because of top-down narratives, right? Like, so whatever your party or your leaders, that sort of thing, the tone is set there, and the beliefs propagate down. Like so, and again, in the US, like one of the biggest purveyors of conspiracies, misinformation, narratives, any of these is mostly on the right. I mean, obviously they exist on the left, but
Oh,
it's
wow. Really?
significantly more on the right. And this has been not just one paper across multiple platforms, across multiple studies. This is consistently found that it's the same in the on the right. It's much more. It's the same in India again. There's only one party that is a source of a lot of the misinformation narratives and so on. So we don't have clear evidence in India, but I assume like it's going to be similar trends. Like certain types of demographics are much more susceptible, and there's reasons for that.
Yeah, I wonder what it is about being right leaning that makes makes you susceptible to misinformation. Okay, so now we're in the whole foray of AI getting in, solving a bunch of problems. I use it a lot for my work. I see a lot of potential to solve a lot of problems where human intervention in the past was required. Now you have this sort of artificial synthetic intelligence that could discern certain things for us. I guess what work have you done, or are you doing work on that space, and where do you see long term that helping us out in this misinformation landscape?
Yeah. So I mean, definitely, I think AI as a solution is definitely that's something that we are exploring. We're not there yet, especially for a context like in India, context like WhatsApp, which have the following challenges. One is it's a conversation, right? Like so, you need to understand the context, and the context is very very dependent on the context of the group. Like so, if you and your friends are in a group, you could call someone something insulting, but if it's the culture of the group and it's an internal joke, then it's not hate speech. Versus if I am in a public forum and I call someone something, so the context is very it's very context dependent. That depends on who else is in that group and your offline connections to them, and there's no AI that can really ingest that or get that information, right? Like so that's one. Like especially in a chat context, it's very hard to detect and understand context. The other problem with platform like WhatsApp is again, we have data for this. Over 50% of the content is non-textual. Again, if you see your WhatsApp, you'll have the same kind of belief. Like a lot of it is not just text; it's videos, images, audio, emojis, that sort of thing, which is not the same as your Twitters or your Facebooks, that sort of thing, where mostly it's textual conversation. Again, the tech and AI for text is much more advanced than what it is for these sorts of multimodal setups, right? Like especially if it's images that go along with the text or video that goes along with the text, and both of these combined actually form the misinformation rather than one of them. So that kind of thing, again, we don't have it right now. It might exist in like a few years down the line, but the third problem here, so the first is context, the second is multimodal, the third is multilingual. So in our context, again, it's Hindi or other low resource languages where it does not work as well as it works in English. Again, people are working on solutions for this. Might be better 3-5 years down the line, but not there yet.
Yeah, I mean, to the point of context, I use a lot of agentic infrastructure. I use Crew AI. I spin up agents for all sorts of things. And when I use it, even on a one-on-one chat or even within the agentic infrastructure, it seems to hold context really well. I guess my 2 cents is that the intelligence is at the level of a group of research assistants. I sometimes I'll say, I'll spin up a bunch of agents and say, I want you to, come up with a script for a podcast. These are the parameters. This is the person, blah, blah, blah. And I mean, I use Claude 3.5 Sonnet, which is really good, right? I'm sure you've heard of it or use it. And these agents I use, I mean, they are on par or exceed human kind of cognizance, the ability to understand nuance, the ability to sort of contextualize certain pieces of data. And I guess my 2 cents is that I see I'm a huge I'm a huge AI a fan, because it helps me spin up these research assistants for a variety of things. I do artwork, blogging, and podcasting, all of these things. It helps me in every little context, and it also understands that sort of contextual knowledge. So anyway, you won this award, which is let me read it out here. The Academic Glance Distinguished Young Research Award. Can you speak to that?
Yeah. I mean, it's an award that is given every year at this conference on web and social media. It's one of the premier conferences on social computing, or computing for social good kind of purposes. And yeah, it's a very prestigious award.
Congratulations, man.
Yeah. Thanks.
Fantastic. Yeah. Sorry. I didn't mean to cut you off. Just congratulating you.
I mean, yeah. So it's for work done in this space on how do you use computing technology for social good purposes, trying to use AI, for instance, for solving some of these societal problems like misinformation. I think my work specifically in the global south arena, countries like India and Brazil, I think that's what actually helped me get that award. Yeah.
Oh wow. And I guess looking forward, I guess what would be your advice? People want to get into the space. I mean, I'm looking at WhatsApp echo chambers, or that you reference. By the way, can you describe in very kind of plain English terms what is an echo chamber?
Mm-hmm. So yeah, an echo chamber is a phenomena where, if you think of a physical echo chamber, that's where the term comes from. An echo chamber, a physical echo chamber, is a place where you hear an echo, right? So you speak something and you're in a chamber where you just hear your own voice over and over. So that's an echo chamber. In the context of social media, it's a metaphorical place where you're surrounded by people who produce ideas that are just agreeing and similar to yours, right? And this more and more often keeps happening on social media, not just on WhatsApp, but on other platforms. And the reason why I bring in WhatsApp and other platforms is important. So on other platforms like Facebook or Twitter and so on, it's the algorithms that are doing this, right? So there's more and more, you choose to interact and engage with certain types of content, and the algorithm really says, oh yeah, Kiran likes this type of content, let me show more of this, so we get more engagement. And that creates these sorts of echo chambers where you may not necessarily choose to engage with certain type of content, but if you open my YouTube feed now, it's all a certain type of content. And that's an echo chamber that these algorithms are creating. And there's a lot of awareness within the social media platforms about this, and they're trying to diversify your feeds and all of that. There's a lot of effort in there. But if you take WhatsApp, there's no algorithms, right? It's all personal choices, and we still see there's a lot of echo chamber behavior where the groups you join, the people you interact with, they're very limited. And this has to do with again your sorts of cognitive dissonance and the term that you mentioned earlier. So if I have the choice, I don't want to go and deliberately spend the limited time that I have spending things on things that are dissonant to me and I feel uncomfortable and spends my brain cycles or whatever. I would just want to enjoy my things that I agree with, and I don't have to put a lot of mental effort in. So that's the reason why these things happen.
Okay, so if I had to interpret what you just said, we become susceptible to echo chambers because we don't want to use a lot of cognitive resources. It's much easier to consume something that gives us easy answers, something that is just kind of fast food for the brain, so to speak. And I guess what is your recommendation, or your how do we inoculate ourselves to be a little more critical thinking about this? How do we, at a personal level, how do we take responsibility from a personal perspective?
Yeah, I mean, before we go there, one thing to set the context is, obviously the sort of echo chamber behavior is not dangerous in all contexts, right? If I'm watching cricket all the time and it's only cricket that's being recommended, that's good. It's not somehow I expect Facebook or YouTube to show me more of, golf or something. I'm not interested in that. I don't want to. So this echo chamber behavior is only dangerous when it comes to large scale political content, right? Where, society itself is never in a position to deliberate and discuss with others, and they're not consuming information from the other side, right? And so it's only for political content, specific types of political content, that this type of deliberation is important and necessary. And so that's the area of concern. But overall, if you think of how much politics people consume, it's not that much. Like, so, you again, like there's studies that show maybe 5 to 10% of the information that people consume on average. Again, you and me might be outliers, or again, like, so certain people might be outliers, but most on average, like most people don't consume all their time consuming politics or news. Like it's a small amount, like 5 to 10, not negligent, like a small amount, but not negligible, right? Like, so okay, so given that, like, okay, how do we inoculate ourselves? Like, one thing is, again, like you have to give it to the platforms. Like I was just talking to someone from one of these platforms, and to a certain extent, like they really overcorrected in a sense, like to the fact that this is happening for political stuff. I mean, there's been research that was done. Like there's this other term called the filter bubble, which is about like the same thing. Algorithms filtering out content that create a bubble for you where you're only seeing content that agrees with your view. And a lot of these platforms, the big ones, specifically, Facebook, Google, they're really aware of this problem, and they do have these factors that ensure that people get diverse viewpoints, at least from the algorithmic perspective. But again, like there's two parts to this. Like one is the user choices, like what we choose to consume and what we are interacting with, and the other is what the algorithm is recommending to us. So the platforms can work with the algorithmic part of it, making sure it's diverse. But it's also up to the users to choose what they want to consume. And obviously, it's not an easy thing. It's not a one shot that fits all. Like you just being aware of the fact that you are in an echo chamber, like of your choosing, I think is, again, that's a literacy point there. Like a lot of people may not just even be aware of the fact that you are in this chamber where you're not getting other viewpoints, right? Like, and it happens to all of us, right? Like, so whenever we see surprises in, like, I don't know, I thought Trump was doing really bad during the last cycle, but he got like 75 million votes. I again, in my echo chamber, nobody told me that okay, Trump had like 75 million people who were supporting him, right? Like, and that's a certain type of echo chamber. Maybe that's not a great example, but anyway, so just being aware of the fact that and cognizant of where you get your information from, and trying to be cognizant of that, I think is already quite good.
Yeah, it also requires you to spend some energy, like you were mentioning earlier. It's the onus is back on you to be a more responsible citizen. But and also like thinking about this whole conceptual echo chamber, right? Like it's a relatively, I mean, I learned it only, I don't know, 10 years ago or something like that, which goes to show it's not a widely circulated term in the vernacular, right? We normalize echo chambers. It's very normalized, at least in my parents' circle who are in their 70s, 60s, and 70s. I mean, for them, it's like, what do you mean echo chamber? This is the gospel. I'm going to listen to this news source or whatever it is that's going to explain to me what I already know, and they're going to confirm my biases and so on. I think, go ahead. Sorry.
Like, I think on that point, like, echo chambers always existed, right? Like, it's not like, this is a new phenomena that social media has created.
Right.
Like, like you were saying,
amplified it, for
we had
sure.
two channels to watch, and I watched the channel that is my viewpoints, right? And also,
Right.
like offline echo chambers. Obviously, my friends are gonna be people who have similar belief systems as me, have similar political views as me.
Sure.
So that sort of thing already existed. Like, I think this sort of mass scale, platform induced echo chambers are like difficult things. And I think it's even a better thing that we're at a stage where on social media, on the digital world, we have much more choices now. So yeah, just being aware of, and having to exercise that, saying, okay, I've consumed this much from this particular source, let me just try to diversify. Just that knowledge, I think, is enough. Like, I think that will really help in mitigating a lot of these issues.
Yeah, and I guess I'll ask you a personal question. So illiteracy is a big problem in India. Last time I checked the statistics, it was something like close to 70% was the literacy rate in India, something like that. So nearly a third of India is, illiterate, unable to read and things like that. They're probably consuming videos or pictures or what have you. I mean, that is a mountain of a problem by itself. right? And you're talking about digital literacy and stuff like that. Like, that's a far milestone. What are I mean, I guess, how does this kind of rank in terms of, like, how do we prioritize just basic literacy to begin with? And the other problem is, in India, we've got this kind of multilingual landscape, right? Like, and so, you could be bombarded in various languages, and how do you how do you translate these things in various languages? It's a very compounding kind of a problem in India. I mean, I'm sure you've thought about this.
Yeah. So I mean, again, like when you're thinking of this problem over a long time, so this is the last generation, right? Like, so that, okay, that we cannot really, fix or educate at scale. So a lot of the digital literacy or literacy initiatives, like if you, again, stratify literacy by age group, like the younger generation is doing much better. I mean, there's so much money being spent on all these, national education mission and so on. So I think on the younger side, it's close to 90% or so at the literacy rate, like below 18. So, but obviously, you're spending a lot of money on that, but they're not really learning a lot. So the quality of education that people get is really, really low. So obviously, yeah, focusing on literacy and improving the schooling system, especially government schooling, the public infrastructure schooling, that's a huge task for India. That needs to be fixed. Like, but if you can incorporate these sorts of issues of, like, okay, digital literacy, I think, I've spent a significant amount of my life in Finland. Finland does it so well. Like, they are one of the world leaders in doing this sort of literacy, and they've quickly embraced technology, and now they're really trying to teach kids how to type instead of writing in cursive, things like that. I think they really move very fast and do things in a certain way. I mean, probably it'll take a decade or so for a country like India to catch up, but we need to have policy that ensures that these things are taught from, like, your childhood, like, from your primary school, so that, again, you cannot really separate now literacy and digital literacy, because once these kids are at a certain level in school, they're already going to start using technology, and so that's become a part of life now, so you cannot really escape that. So it should be definitely included in curriculums in schools.
Yeah. Okay. I guess my last question to you then, or maybe my last question, I know your time is is premium. How much do you work with, like, these big name companies in Silicon Valley and other companies that create these tools? Like, you're directly interacting with these people. I guess, what is your experience with that, with working with that? How open are they? Because they also have to balance business interest versus mass adoption of these platforms and so on. Like, can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah. So again, like, my views on this are slightly I'm very sympathetic to the platforms and the way they need to make decisions.
Really?
Like, I'm very pro platforms. And
you don't think they're the villains?
No, absolutely. I really have a belief that, this belief that they are somehow the villains who lead people to echo chambers, or leading to teens getting, whatever, like, that's a very misconceived belief. Like, I mean, especially running businesses at this scale requires a lot of decisions, right? Like, where you cannot optimize for one set of people, and there's always going to be these sorts of edge cases where those kinds of things happen. But overall, I think they're very responsible and try to be responsible. Again, this belief is not, like, very widespread, like, but
right.
My personal belief is that there are a lot of people in a lot of these companies that do genuinely care. And it's not binary. Like, you cannot say, okay, they're maximizing profit, so that's why people are seeing misinformation. It does not work that way. Obviously, I mean, there's so many dimensions here. They have to somehow work with, like, regulatory pressures. They have to work with bureaucratic pressure. They have to work with, authoritarian governance.
Shareholder pressures.
There's so many different parameters that they have to balance. And it comes to, when, obviously, can they do better? Yeah, they can do better. Like, are they trying their best? Like, maybe they're not trying their best, but are they really trying to really make things worse? Definitely not. Like, and my personal interaction with a lot of people in these companies really gives me that hope that it's not just that binary thing where they're engaging, like maximizing profit, so they're ignoring a lot of this. I think it's much more in the middle, like.
Okay. So they have the levers over the algorithm, right? And like, so what I'm hearing you're saying is that they have levers of the algorithm. They are good actors. They're doing their best to kind of balance all of these things. But what you see in like other podcasts or conspiracy theorists or people who have a axe to grind with these social media companies is that, oh, they tune the algorithm up to just throw red meat at you, is the notion, right?
That is absolutely false. Like, again,
It is false.
it's absolutely false. Like, it's provably false that I mean, again, like, it's a regulatory problem for them, right? Like, if they really are knowingly doing this sort of tuning to somehow cause harm, they're going to jail, right? And they really are careful about.
So you don't think
So,
they're finding loopholes which are just
again,
ethically wrong but legally acceptable?
again, like, I mean, there might be specific cases where specific teams have had features A/B tested in a way where maybe they chose a specific thing that optimized for profit rather than
Yeah.
social. Very specific cases, but generally speaking, like, this notion that social media guys have a dial in the algorithm and they're tuning it doesn't work that way. I mean,
Okay.
there's no one algorithm. There's no one tune that you can do. And again, like I said, any balance you do, like to reduce certain type of harm, will harm other types of people, right? Like, so there's no one steady state where this is beneficial for all of them. And it's also not just the algorithm. There's a lot of human choices that are involved in this, right? Like,
Right.
so a lot of people themselves are bad actors, or deliberately or not. Like, so you're choosing to consume certain type of content or certain type of engage in certain type of activity or post certain types of so there's a lot of this that they have to balance, and it's very, very, very difficult, if not impossible, to find this fine balance where everything is all sunny and nice, right? Like, so that's impossible. So yeah, I think that's a very wrong notion that somehow there's these evil guys who are trying to maximize profit. It might happen. I'm not saying it's not happening, but it's not, like, I don't know, it happens in 1% of the cases. It's not the majority.
Okay. Well, that opens my eyes up a little bit. I mean, I had this very cynical view that it's a profit maximizing machine. These Googles and Facebooks of the world, they don't care. They, as long as they can straddle the line of being legally acceptable, they're going to take that line, and ethics could go out the window. What I'm hearing you're saying is that they absolutely try to be on the ethical side of these questions, or these, like, morally gray area kind of areas where they're not bad actors. They're trying their best. But I think then the takeaway I see personally is that it's a multi-pronged effort. Like, we have to societally also engage ourselves, to educate ourselves, to rid ourselves of misinformation biases and so on. We have to attack this from, like, critical thinking perspective. Like, how do we teach our kids to not fall for certain kinds of narratives and so on? At the same time, we tune up all the levers on the technical side. That's the only way we're going to tackle this. Is that there's no one size fits all solution. There's no magic bullet here.
Yeah, it's as much a self correction as it is your evil platform that is responsible for a lot of these, right? Like, so there's equal responsibility in this. And definitely, again, like, maybe there was a time when everything was move fast and break things, and they realized that not the way that is. I mean, that's going to get them to jail, so they don't want to do it anymore. Maybe it was that way back in the day, but it's changed.
Yeah.
Really, things are not like that anymore. Like, so it's much more thought through, especially at these big platforms. And the big platforms are the one that really have the most impact. Like, they are extremely careful. Yeah.
Yeah. Speaking of which, really quick, can you speak about that RWC score? I found that very interesting, how you could recommend certain kinds of content to people with opposing views and stuff. Can you talk to that?
Yeah. So basically, the idea there, it's exactly like a solution to the question that you had about how do people get out of their echo chambers, right? Like, and one of the findings that we had was obviously, if you are, this polarization is on a spectrum. Like, so if you are an extreme right person, you wouldn't want to be recommended something on the extreme left, and you may want to be on the center, right? If you are on the center, maybe it's okay for you to see something more on the extreme on the other side just to broaden your perspectives and so on. So we kind of operationalize this mathematically as users as a network, connections between users, and then the flow of information as a random walk on that network. Basically, it's random walks are really powerful. They exist all over networks in nature. Like for instance, the Google PageRank is basically just a random walk on a network. That gives you this sort of like, if you do a random walk on a network, if you end up in certain pages, those pages are going to be ranked higher. So that's kind of the property of this random walk. So basically, we do something like that, and then we recommend people based on this sort of random walk, and that has certain properties in saying that these are usually well-known, trusted, popular people from the other side with a certain type of opinions. So if you recommend those sorts of people, they're more likely to be engaging to the other side and more likely for you to be open to suggestions from the other side. So that's what we find with this study.
Okay. Wow. Well, Kiran, you're doing a great service to humanity as I see it. Keep doing what you're doing, man. I appreciate your time and your knowledge. And let me know however I could be of future use to you. I will absolutely try my best to amplify your voice however I can. I won't spread misinformation. I'll be as diligent as possible to help digital literacy, I guess. So thank you very much. Cheers.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah.